24-year-old Carson Sistrunk of Rankin County, Mississippi, was a funny and hard-working gentle giant whose loved ones described him as one of the nicest people you'd ever meet. He was liked by everyone who knew him and would have never abandoned the people in his life, which was why they instantly became worried when he vanished in September of 2022. Sistrunk's family told law enforcement that he had planned to meet up with a 20-year-old woman named Sierra Insco, who he had recently connected with online. 2 days after he disappeared, police spotted his pickup truck in Lawrence County and pulled the vehicle over. Insco was behind the wheel. Sistrunk was nowhere in sight, and there was a significant amount of blood in the truck bed, heightening investigators' suspicions that the missing man had met with foul play. Officers arrested Insco on suspicion of vehicle theft, and Sistrunk's body was found in an oil field the following day after a worker noticed tire tracks leading to his remains. Prosecutors charged Insco with murder, and she was held without bond as the case worked its way through the court system. Shortly after her arrest, former friends of the accused killer told the Daily Beast that Insco had a history of swindling and robbing men. Just 3 months earlier, another man had accused her of stealing his vehicle. The victim in the previous case, Aaron Smith, met Insco online and offered to let her stay in an extra room at his house. When she told him she was having problems with her landlord, everything was going fine until Insco told Smith that her mum had been in a car accident one evening. Because she had given Smith no reason not to trust her, he allowed her to borrow his truck for a few days to deal with her family priorities. He was shocked when Insco blocked him from contacting her without returning the vehicle. Smith reported his truck stolen, and police spotted it a few days later. It was being driven by a man Smith had never met, who said he had bought the truck from Insco and provided law enforcement with a bill of sale. In addition to her history of stealing cars, Insco had pretended to be a trauma nurse who was suffering from cancer while living in northern Florida in 2020. She also claimed that she had never met her biological father, which was a lie, and took advantage of people who offered to help her while she underwent cancer treatment. Insco's lies eventually caught up with her down in Florida, prompting her to relocate while she continued her deceptive lifestyle. Her wildly spun web of dishonesty finally unraveled for good following her arrest for Sistrunk's murder, and she ultimately pleaded guilty to the charge. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 35 years. Number 16. William Greer. 29-year-old single mother of 3, Tammy Myers, vanished from the greater Houston area just days before Christmas in 2006. At the time, she was separated from her husband and living with her new boyfriend, William Joseph Greer, who she had met while working as an exotic dancer. Several days after Myers disappeared, Greer wrecked his pickup truck along a roadside in Liberty County, Texas. Police arrived at the scene to find him naked and intoxicated as he rambled about how the gun had just gone off and killed Myers, whose cell phone was found in the vehicle. While everything about the situation seemed suspicious, including Greer's half-coherent homicide confession, law enforcement lacked enough evidence to detain him on any serious charges. He was booked on a public intoxication charge and immediately fled the state after posting bail. During the investigation, Myers' children told police that they overheard their mother and Greer arguing shortly before her disappearance, along with the sound of gunfire. Detectives also learned that the couple fought regularly and that their disagreements had grown increasingly heated over time. In 2007, authorities issued an arrest warrant charging Greer with murder, but his whereabouts remained a mystery for more than a decade. In the meantime, efforts to find any trace of Myers were equally unsuccessful. Finally, in November of 2017, the U.S. Marshals received a tip that Greer had been seen in Mexico. Mexican police apprehended him a few days later in Nacajuca, Tabasco, where he was living with a woman and 2 children. Greer tried claiming that law enforcement was arresting the wrong person, but the police knew that the wanted fugitive was missing a toe and were able to confirm his identity by looking at his foot. He was extradited to Texas, where he ultimately took a plea deal and admitted to second-degree manslaughter. The 58-year-old convicted killer is currently serving a 10-year prison sentence with a projected release date of November 2027. Number 15. Desiree Figueroa. 19-year-old Marlene Ochoa Lopez was due to give birth any day when she vanished in Chicago in April of 2019. Her loved ones reported her missing after she failed to pick up her young son from daycare, which was a surefire sign that something was very wrong. While retracing the young woman's last known movements, investigators learned that she was last seen at a school where she was taking classes. Later that day, a 46-year-old woman named Clarissa Figueroa dialed 911 from her home in the city's Scottsdale neighborhood and claimed that she was experiencing childbirth-related complications. For months, she had told her friends and family that she was pregnant, but police began to suspect that she was lying after discovering that she had recently connected with Ochoa Lopez on social media. Their suspicions were further heightened when they learned that Ochoa Lopez had gone to Figueroa's residence on the day of her disappearance to pick up some free baby clothes that Clarissa had offered. As it tragically turned out, the offer for baby clothing was just a ruse to lure Ochoa Lopez over to the apartment. Detectives' worst fears were confirmed when a DNA test confirmed that the newborn Figueroa was claiming as her own was actually the missing woman's baby. In the meantime, police found the murdered body of Ochoa Lopez in a trash can in a hidden area at the home, along with the cord that was used to strangle her to death, traces of blood, and evidence that someone had tried to clean up the crime scene. Prosecutors accused Clarissa and her daughter, 24-year-old Desiree Figueroa, of killing Ochoa Lopez and stealing her baby from the womb. Both women were detained on charges of first-degree murder and aggravated battery. In a shocking twist, Desiree was 4 months pregnant at the time of her arrest. She gave birth 5 months later and was promptly taken back to jail, while her child was placed in someone else's care. Clarissa's boyfriend, 40-year-old Piotr Bobak, was charged with felony counts of concealing a death and concealing a homicide for helping the women dispose of Ochoa Lopez's remains. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of obstruction of justice and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. In early 2024, Desiree Figueroa pleaded guilty to murder and agreed to testify against her mother in exchange for a 30-year prison sentence. Clarissa Figueroa pleaded guilty to the same charge several months later and was sentenced to 50 years behind bars. Number 14. Adrian James Basham. An Australian mother of 3 named Samantha Fraser succumbed to horrific violence in July of 2018 at the hands of her abusive ex-husband, Adrian James Basham, who brutally murdered her in the garage of her Phillip Island home. At the time, Basham was facing multiple criminal charges for past assaults against Fraser. The court had issued a restraining order banning him from harming his ex-wife, who was slated to testify against him at his upcoming trial. By the time she was murdered, Fraser had lost faith in her country's justice system. Amid her attempts to remain safe from Basham, instead of obeying court orders to leave her alone, Basham continued to threaten and intimidate Fraser, who suspected that he was tracking her phone location. Fraser lived in constant fear that Basham would kill her and/or her children, or that he would have someone else kill them. Speaking with the Daily Mail after the murder, Fraser's mother recalled one particularly ominous incident when her daughter read about a domestic homicide in the newspaper and said, "That will be me." She made her mother promise not to let Basham get away with killing her. In the months leading up to her death, Fraser became so scared for her safety that she moved in with her parents. Unfortunately, this did not stop Basham from murdering her in cold blood after sneaking into the garage and waiting for her to return home from a night out with friends. Fraser's injuries showed that she fought desperately for her life during her final moments. In 2023, Basham was found guilty of murder and sentenced to at least 30 years in prison. He'll spend the vast majority of his term in solitary confinement, where he'll have plenty of time to reflect on his actions. Number 13. Jean-Claude Romand. For nearly 20 years, starting in the 1970s, Jean-Claude Romand masqueraded as a doctor for the World Health Organization. Despite having repeatedly failed his medical exams, his family, friends, and wife had no idea that he had dropped out of college after just one semester and that he had failed to continue pursuing his degree after that. Romand's loved ones had no reason not to believe that he held a prestigious job position in Geneva with far-reaching political connections. In reality, he spent his days inside the WHO's building near his home in Prevey-sur-Marne, France, but he was only allowed to use the organization's free information services. The wannabe doctor also occasionally told his family he was traveling to other countries for work while renting a hotel room near the airport for several days at a time. Romand kept up the ruse by living off money he received from relatives who believed he was investing their earnings in various hedge funds and capital ventures. By late 1992, people had started to ask him for their money. In the meantime, a suspicious family member discovered that Romand was not on the WHO's list of staff members. Realizing that his decades-long double life was about to be exposed, Romand beat his wife to death with a rolling pin in January of 1993. He also killed his 2 children, then drove to his parents' house and murdered his mum and dad. Romand returned to the residence where he had massacred his wife and kids and set the home ablaze while inside. After being rescued by firefighters, he confessed to the killings. He was found guilty in 1996 and was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 22 years. During his time in prison, Romand wrote a book about his life and crimes, which became a bestseller and was made into a movie. He also became religious and expressed seemingly genuine remorse for his crimes. Romand became eligible for parole in 2015 and was released in June of 2019 after serving 26 years behind bars. Number 12. Martha McClancy and Charles Chuck Kazmarchich. Vietnam veterans Robert McClancy and Charles Chuck Kazmarchich met while receiving inpatient treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder and quickly became best friends. They continued to hang out daily after Robert returned to his home in Monroe, Tennessee, and he was grateful to have a friend who understood the unique challenges that come with military-related trauma. At some point, Chuck began having an affair with Robert's wife, Martha. Robert was completely unaware of the illicit relationship or the clandestine couple's desire to eliminate him from the picture. Chuck and Martha got their wish in May of 2006 when Robert was found dead in his living room from a medication overdose. They got married 5 months after Robert passed away and wasted no time cashing in on his life insurance policy, military pension, and survivor's benefits. It would later be revealed that while Chuck had served in the military, he wildly exaggerated his service with bogus stories about being a war hero. Martha, who had never served, also posed as a veteran, and they both fraudulently collected military disability and other benefits that they weren't entitled to. To explain their suspicious influx of money and noticeable lifestyle upgrades, the couple told the people in their social circle that they had landed high-paying government jobs. Chuck and Martha eventually fell under the suspicion of federal investigators who uncovered forged documents that Chuck had used to obtain a Purple Heart and other prestigious military awards. Authorities placed the couple under surveillance, and it wasn't long before they were seen rolling into doctor's appointments in wheelchairs while walking and moving around unassisted at home. The fraudulent activity prompted investigators to take a second look at Robert's death, and they uncovered evidence that Martha and Chuck had co-conspired to kill him. According to prosecutors, the pair had planned the murder well in advance by purposely over-medicating Robert on several occasions and telling doctors that he had done it to himself. by making it look like Robert had a habit of taking too many pills. Chuck and Martha had avoided suspicion of foul play in connection with his death, but their crimes eventually caught up with them, and in 2012, they were indicted on federal charges of Social Security fraud and stealing public money. They were also eventually convicted of Robert's murder, and are both currently serving 25-year prison sentences. Number 11. Christopher Wade. 19-year-old Leah Porter vanished in Westminster, Colorado, in June of 2014 and was never seen again. During their frantic efforts to find her, the young woman's family noticed that she had recently corresponded with a 23-year-old former high school classmate named Christopher Wade. Suspicious that Wade knew more than he was admitting to, Leah's brother Max Porter persuaded him to meet up at a park where he secretly recorded their conversation. Wade confessed to choking Leah in his apartment during a struggle over a knife, claiming that he believed it would calm her down. Overcome with rage over what he had just learned, Max punched Wade in the face, dialed 911 and forced him to confess to the dispatcher. The admitted killer was brought down to the police station for questioning, where he gave a third confession. Wade had initially made it sound like Leah's death was an accident. He later implied that he had acted in self-defense, even though Leah weighed less than 100 pounds soaking wet. During his conversation with the police, he claimed that he had put the victim's body in a duffel bag and thrown it into a dumpster near his apartment building. Her remains have never been recovered. Police did not believe Wade's self-defense claim, but without a body or any other evidence to prove otherwise, they feared that they did not have a strong enough case to secure a murder conviction. In order to avoid a trial, they negotiated a plea deal with Wade, who pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 48 years in prison. As part of the agreement, Wade was required to provide a detailed account of Leah's murder. He later told 2020 that he had confessed to the crime in the first place because his tarot cards told him that his guilt would destroy him if he didn't own up to his wrongdoings. Wade also denied long-standing suspicions that he had pursued a criminology degree prior to the murder, with the intention of learning how to get away with killing someone. He'll become eligible for parole in 2047 at the age of 56. Number 10. Angela Simpson. In August of 2009, the burning remains of a 46-year-old paraplegic man named Terry Neely were found in a church parking lot in Phoenix, Arizona. He had last been seen leaving his assisted living facility in his motorized wheelchair several nights earlier. Those who knew him described him as a kind person who suffered from a mild intellectual disability. He had no known enemies and was well liked within the community, yet someone had cruelly dismembered his body after murdering him in cold blood. An autopsy revealed that Neely had been stabbed at least 50 times, bludgeoned repeatedly, and his teeth had been ripped out with pliers. A 3-inch screw had been drilled into his forehead, and his throat had been slit. Acting on a tip, investigators questioned a 33-year-old woman named Angela Simpson, who had been seen using drugs with Neely outside a local apartment complex on several previous occasions. During a visit to her home, officers found Neely's scooter in her yard. Inside, they found a large amount of blood evidence, bleach, and torn-up carpet. When confronted with the evidence, Simpson shamelessly admitted to luring Neely into the apartment with the promise of intimacy and drugs, torturing him for 3 days and murdering him. She laughed as she described the killing in detail, claiming that she had committed the crime because Neely was a snitch. No evidence has ever been found to suggest that this was the case, but Simpson said during a jailhouse interview that she still wouldn't feel bad if she found out that Neely wasn't a rat. After pleading guilty to Neely's murder and being sentenced to life without parole in 2012, she said that if she could do anything differently, she would keep Neely alive longer for the sake of prolonging his suffering. Number 9. Jacob Jones. In October of 2003, high school student Kimberly Holton's heavily decomposed body was found in the Atlantic Ocean off Cape May Point, New Jersey. She had been strangled to death, then dumped into the water with a chain around her ankles and duct tape on her hands and feet. Based on the evidence, investigators suspected that Holton's killer had attached some sort of weight to her body before throwing it into the ocean, but the weights had become separated from her remains, causing her corpse to float to the surface. Prior to her murder, Holton was a kind but troubled teenager who lacked a stable home life and support system. She lived in foster care in Dover, Delaware, with another high school girl named Heather Nasakaitis, whom she fought with constantly. Due to Holton's volatile relationship with her foster sister, police immediately suspected Nasakaitis of being involved in her murder. Nasakaitis maintained her innocence, but investigators only became more suspicious of her after her 20-year-old boyfriend, Jacob Jones, was identified in surveillance footage of two men buying the chain and cinder blocks that were later attached to Holton's body. In many ways, Jones was not a typical murder suspect. He was a straight-A college student from a privileged upbringing who had never been in trouble with the law, but Jones despised Holton and blamed her for causing problems for Nasakaitis at home, pointing toward a possible motive for wanting the victim dead. Following the discovery of Holton's body, Jones immediately hired a lawyer and refused to talk to anyone about the case, including law enforcement. About a week after Holton's remains were found, he confessed to killing the victim to his parents. He died later that day, prompting his friend, 23-year-old Michael Kaiser, to tell police what had really happened on the night of Holton's death. Kaiser revealed that he had accompanied Jones and Holton to a motel where both men were intimate with the young woman. Holton showered afterward and Jones ambushed her as she exited the bathroom. He smothered and choked her to death, and Kaiser admitted that he helped Jones hold Holton's body down until she stopped moving. The men wrapped the victim's remains in a blanket, attached the chain and cinder blocks to the body, and chartered a plane using Jones's pilot license. They flew over the Atlantic, dropped the lifeless victim into the water, and hoped that they had gotten away with their crimes. In 2004, Kaiser was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy. He's currently serving a life sentence in the Delaware state prison system. Jones's motive for killing Holton remains a mystery to this day. Nasakaitis was never charged in connection with the murder, and she believes that her boyfriend committed the crime because he thought it would make her happy. On the other hand, experts say it's extremely rare for someone to commit murder strictly for another person's benefit, indicating that Jones may have killed Holton in order to prevent Nasakaitis from finding out about their intimate encounters. Unfortunately, the only two people who know the answer to these questions took their secrets to the grave. Number 8. Sheila Labare. In February of 2006, police in the small town of Epping, New Hampshire, received a call from the concerned mother of 24-year-old son, Kenneth County, who had recently moved into the home of his new girlfriend, 47-year-old Sheila Labare. County's mom described her son as having a low IQ and childlike trust in others, causing her to worry that Kenneth was being taken advantage of or abused by his older partner. Officers paid a visit to Labare's remote, sprawling farm, where Labare initially refused to let them speak with County. She eventually relented, and County told the police that he wanted to be at the property. Satisfied that he was there on his own free will, the officers left the scene. A few weeks later, officers responded to a call about a disruptive shopper at a local Walmart store, where they saw Labare pushing County around in a wheelchair. County's condition had deteriorated noticeably since the last time the police had seen him. His skin was ashen, there were cuts and bruises on his face and hands, and one of his hands was noticeably swollen. Labare interrupted the officers when they tried talking to County and told them he had been injured in a car accident. The cops watched as Labare wheeled County out into the parking lot and lifted him into her truck because he was unable to walk on his own. Just days later, County's mother called the police in a panic. She couldn't reach her son and had been told that he had left Labare's farm alone. Knowing that Kenneth couldn't take care of himself, she was extremely concerned for his safety. Officers' calls to Labare went unanswered, and then she called one of them back out of the blue in the middle of the night. She said that County no longer lived with her and then played an audio tape of him admitting to horrific crimes against several female relatives. County's confessions sounded forced, and Labare could be heard taunting him as he heaved, gagged, and threw up. After receiving the disturbing call, police visited the farm where they found County's burnt, partial skeletal remains and a charred mattress in an outdoor burn pit. Inside the residence, the officers found blood spatter evidence that was connected to another one of her former boyfriends, 35-year-old Michael DeLogue, who had vanished in 2005. They also found toe bones that did not belong to DeLogue or County. Labare was charged with 2 counts of murder and pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. The court determined that she did not fit the criteria for legal insanity, and the jury found her guilty as charged. She was sentenced to life without parole. Number 7. Drew Peterson. Bolingbrook, Illinois police officer Drew Peterson married his 3rd wife, Kathleen Savio, in 1992 after his first 2 marriages ended in divorce. 10 years later, he was heading toward a 3rd divorce as his relationship with Kathleen fell apart. Over a 2-year period during the early 2000s, police responded to domestic disputes at the couple's home at least 18 times. Their divorce was finalized in October of 2003. 5 months later, in March of 2004, Kathleen was found dead in a dry bathtub with suspicious injuries. Her death was ruled an accident, despite any evidence pointing to the contrary, and personal friends of Peterson reassured skeptical parties that he was a good man who would never harm Kathleen. 6 months later, Peterson married his 4th wife, 19-year-old Stacey Ann Cales, who was 30 years his junior. Stacey mysteriously vanished 3 years later in 2007, prompting her sister to report her missing. Peterson claimed that his wife had left him for another man, and at the time there was no evidence to suggest that she had met with foul play. Her disappearance nevertheless piqued the suspicions of investigators and caused them to wonder if they had missed anything unusual about Kathleen's death 3 years earlier. Authorities exhumed Kathleen's body in 2008 and reclassified her death as a homicide, following a closer look at her injuries. While the updated autopsy results were never revealed to the public, prosecutors concluded that they had enough information to move forward with a murder case against Peterson, who they accused of staging the death as an accident. Around the same time, a pastor at Stacey's church reported that Stacey had told him that Drew had done just that. Peterson maintained his innocence, but was found guilty of Kathleen's murder in 2012 and sentenced to 38 years in prison. In 2015, he was charged with attempting to hire a hitman to kill the prosecutor in his case, James Glasgow, after a jailhouse informant captured audio recordings of him discussing the plan. The court found Peterson guilty of the charge and sentenced him to an additional 40 years in prison, ensuring that he will never step foot in the free world again. Stacey Peterson remains missing to this day, but is presumed dead. Authorities believe Drew murdered her, but without her body or any other evidence to support these suspicions. The case officially remains unsolved. Number 6. Timothy Coates. An autistic teenager from Michigan named Sam Coates drowned in March of 2019 after spending an hour in his family's cold backyard pool with his arms restrained. According to Sam's parents, he was nonverbal and had the mental capacity of a 13 to 17-month-old infant. They kept his arms bound to prevent him from harming himself or others. Sam required constant supervision, yet his family had left him alone on the outdoor deck of their Georgetown Township home on the day of his death. His father, 50-year-old Timothy Coates, had gone to his job as a college professor while his mother, Michelle Coates, stayed at home but fell asleep after working an overnight shift as a registered nurse. The couple's daughter, Sam's sister, had seen her brother in the swimming pool and sent a photo of him to Timothy. She later told investigators that she yelled for her mother, but no one answered. Timothy responded to his daughter's text message by asking her to check on the freak. The young woman told her father that Sam appeared to be stuck and sent Timothy another photo of her brother in chest-deep water. By the time Michelle woke up and went outside to get Sam out of the pool, he had drowned. At first glance, the tragedy seemed like the result of an unfortunate one-off mistake which led to Sam being unsupervised, but prosecutors claimed that law enforcement had been called to the family's home at least 15 times prior to the teen's death due to Sam escaping from the residence. Following the young man's death, Timothy Coates was charged with manslaughter and child abuse. Both he and Michelle faced prescription drug fraud charges for continuing to fill Sam's Ritalin prescription after he passed away and using it for themselves. Michelle received a 21-day jail sentence for the drug charge, while Timothy was sentenced to 2 to 15 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter, plus 2 to 4 years for the Ritalin charge. During his sentencing hearing, Timothy admitted to calling his son a freak, but insisted he never would have harmed Sam. He said it was his way of blowing off steam during a moment of frustration, and that he and Michelle had genuinely tried to accommodate their son's needs during his tragically short lifetime. Number 5. Cynthia Sedabaka. 53-year-old Giaward Eustaquio was shot dead at his home outside San Diego in Fallbrook, California, by his own mother-in-law in February of 2014, showing zero remorse. 65-year-old Cynthia Sedabaka told police that she shot Eustaquio 10 times with a .38 caliber revolver after he told her that she wasn't invited to her granddaughter's spelling bee and that she looked ghetto. She also admitted that she stopped to reload the gun and that she continued shooting Eustaquio through the door after he rushed inside the house. Sedabaka then entered the residence and continued to pump bullets into the dying victim as she stood over him, pulling the trigger until the clip was empty. When asked by the police if she checked on Eustaquio after the shooting, the senior citizen said, "I didn't care. I would do it again." After killing her son-in-law, she ate breakfast, went gambling, and stopped for coffee. She was arrested a short while later on suspicion of murder. Sedabaka claimed that the victim had subjected her and other family members to abuse for over a decade, but she failed to go into detail when pressed for more information about the alleged mistreatment by investigators, and she described Eustaquio as evil, but interrogation room footage showed that her daughter, the victim's wife, and granddaughter were clearly distraught when they learned of his death. In early 2017, Sedabaka was found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison, which, at her age, means that she'll never see freedom again. Number 4. Glenn Braden. During the spring of 2023, a serial attacker committed a string of terrifying assaults against female hikers along trails in Jefferson County, Colorado. Law enforcement spokesperson Jackie Kelly told Westword that the sheriff's office had never seen such a high volume of attacks in local parks. Later identified as 21-year-old Glenn Braden, the assailant lurked in the wilderness unclothed and assaulted his victims naked. When his crimes were at their worst, he attacked as many as 3 women in one day. The serial pervert grew increasingly brazen and aggressive with each attack, according to authorities, who posted signs warning park visitors about his presence. Victims reported being groped and propositioned by the attacker, who tried to rip at least one woman's clothing off and offered another hiker money in exchange for favors. Braden was arrested in August of 2023 on suspicion of 15 felonies, including 9 counts of indecent exposure and various assault and attempted assault charges. He remained behind bars with bail set at $100,000 while his mother tried to convince the courts that he needed mental help rather than punishment. She attended every single hearing in hopes that her advocacy would spare Braden from prison time, but the accused predator was found competent to stand trial. A year after his arrest, Braden pleaded guilty to 1 count each of attempted assault, unlawful contact, and indecent exposure. He's facing between 4 and 12 years to life in prison and is scheduled to be sentenced in September. Number 3. Leon Balfour. In an appalling act of violence that was captured on video in May of 2017, a 68-year-old grandmother named Nancy James was body slammed and dragged into a community pool in North Lauderdale, Florida, for asking a group of teenagers to turn their music down. The confrontation occurred after several residents at James's apartment complex had called law enforcement to complain about the noise. Deputies were taking a long time to arrive, so James took it upon herself to try talking to the rowdy group on her own. In the disturbing clip of the attack, someone could be heard yelling, "Throw her in," right before a young man named Leon Balfour picked James up and slammed her to the ground. Balfour and most of the other partygoers fled the scene by the time police arrived. The teen later turned himself in to law enforcement at his mother's urging and was charged with 1 count of battery. He pleaded guilty and expressed remorse for his actions, telling James that he didn't mean to harm her. James offered up some harsh honesty to Balfour, describing his behavior as cruel and inhuman, but she also acknowledged that the young man had a promising future ahead of him and asked the court to spare him from jail time. The judge honored the request and sentenced Balfour to a year of probation along with 200 hours of community service. He was required to serve at least 100 hours of his volunteer work with the elderly and was also ordered to abide by a strict curfew during his probationary period. Today's topic was requested by Stee6535 and Marinka C911. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Aaron Matthew Schindel. During the pre-dawn hours one morning in August of 2024, a paralyzed California man named Johnny Alexander Bash III was murdered inside his Irvine home by his caretaker, 47-year-old Aaron Matthew Schindel. According to police, Schindel crashed his minivan into Bash's residence, then stabbed the 38-year-old victim to death. By the time officers arrived at the scene, Schindel had fled on foot, leaving his vehicle behind. When police caught up with him less than a half-mile away from Bash's home, he charged at an officer with a knife in his hand, prompting the cop to shoot him in self-defense. Schindel was rushed to a nearby hospital where he died from his injuries. The deadly violence occurred seemingly out of the blue, according to a police spokesperson. Authorities released few other details, citing an ongoing investigation, and Bash's reasons for snapping have yet to be revealed. If you thought these real-life demons couldn't get any more diabolical, wait till after number 1 to see what happens when unstable individuals make mountains out of molehills in our previous release of When Batshit Crazy Goes Wrong. Number 1. Appalling elder abuse. On an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon in April of 2019, an elderly Australian woman was thrown to the ground and kicked during an argument at a shopping centre in Geelong, Victoria. Shocking footage showed the senior citizen who relied on a walker exchanging words with a much younger woman who shoved her against a building and grabbed her by the hair in broad daylight. A horrified onlooker could be heard commenting that the victim was just an old lady, while the attacker replied that she didn't care. Thankfully, bystanders intervened and stopped the assault from continuing. They helped the victim to her feet and the 23-year-old suspect fled the scene. Police later caught up with the accused assailant, who was arrested on multiple charges. The outcome of the case is unclear. In late 2016, 35-year-old Cheryl Rearmount fatally shot her boyfriend, Matthew Bernardi, aged 32, in Las Vegas, Nevada. The couple had been dating since May of that year, and Rearmount had reportedly endured verbal and physical abuse throughout their months-long involvement. On the night of November the 20th, the couple were gambling at the Canary Casino and Hotel when they started to argue. The dispute escalated while they were en route to their apartment complex on East Lake Mead Boulevard. Upon reaching the apartment car park, Bernardi grabbed Rearmount by the back of the head and slammed her face into the dashboard. Rearmount then started to bleed from the nose and was forced to move into the back seat. Bernardi then started driving west on Lake Boulevard. Moments later, Rearmount retrieved a handgun and shot her abusive boyfriend once through the back of the driver's seat, killing him. She then ran back to the apartment complex and notified her neighbor at around 7:45 p.m. Police arrived at the scene and arrested Rearmount on one count of open murder with a deadly weapon. The charge was later amended to voluntary manslaughter. In April of the following year, Rearmount told the judge that during the incident, Bernardi had repeatedly threatened to kill her. She claimed that she had to shoot him in order to save her own life. Subsequently, the manslaughter charge was dropped. Rearmount pleaded guilty to carrying a concealed weapon and was handed 2 years of probation. Additionally, she was ordered to undergo mental health and substance abuse evaluations and have no contact with Bernardi's family. Number 9. Devon Epps. In mid-2011, 36-year-old Devon Epps from Stockton, California, murdered his girlfriend, then left her rotting corpse in his bathroom. 35-year-old Veronica Jones suddenly stopped visiting and contacting her friends and family on June the 2nd. Her brother later stated that he instantly knew something was wrong, but Jones was officially reported missing on June the 27th. Officers went to check the apartment she shared with Epps in Stockton a month after the missing persons report was filed. They didn't physically enter the apartment according to subsequent reports. Jones wasn't found until many months later, on December the 5th, when her rotting corpse was discovered by the apartment manager. The body, which had been stashed in the bathtub of the apartment, was beaten beyond recognition, but later identified as Jones through dental records. It was determined that the victim had been bludgeoned in the head with a metal table pedestal and stabbed 32 times. After the gruesome discovery, Epps was arrested, accused of slaying Jones and forcing himself upon her with a foreign object. He maintained his innocence, claiming he'd been set up. The death penalty was initially a possibility for Epps, but prosecutors considered his history of mental illness and pursued life in prison instead. On January the 2nd of 2013, San Joaquin County jurors found Epps guilty of murder as well as murder by torture and assault. A month later, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 8. Tory Branch. He's a sociopath. He has no emotion. That was how Mia Jones described her estranged boyfriend in court after he ended the life of their unborn baby on March the 28th of 2014. Prior to the incident, 33-year-old Jones from Brooklyn was repeatedly warned by her boyfriend, Tory Branch, not to give birth to the child. According to court records, Branch hid in the street outside Jones's Crown Heights apartment building on the day in question, while his unidentified accomplice grabbed the woman in the lobby of the building. The brutal moment was caught on surveillance footage, which showed the masked men attacking Jones. Branch punched his girlfriend in the head and stomach at least 22 times, while his accomplice wrapped his arms around the woman's throat and head. After the onslaught, Jones was left lying motionless on the floor as the assailants absconded. Within minutes, Jones regained consciousness and called for help. She was subsequently taken to Kings County Hospital, where the unborn child was pronounced dead. Doctors then performed a C-section and later transfused blood twice for Jones's survival. Branch and 34-year-old Elijah Green were arrested after Jones identified them as her attackers. The two men were hit with multiple charges, including burglary causing injury and forced abortion. In December, Green's indictment was dismissed after surveillance footage revealed that the masked attacker was actually shorter than him by about 6 inches. Upon further investigation, it was determined that Branch researched miscarriages 2 months prior to the assault. He was found guilty of the charges levied against him and was consequently ordered to serve between 27 and 32 years behind bars. As of the latest updates on the matter, Branch's true accomplice was still at large. Number 7. Jamarian Reese. After a violent viral video of a Texas teen assaulting his girlfriend circulated online and amassed nearly 4 million views, Waco police issued a warrant for the young man's arrest. The footage, which was recorded in March of 2019, showed a young woman allegedly pulling a prank on her 17-year-old boyfriend, Jamarian Reese. She pretended to break up with Reese, and the latter responded by attacking her. During the ensuing assault, the defenseless girl could be heard desperately screaming, "It's a prank!" Reese threw at least 21 punches before walking away. In the aftermath, the couple relished their resulting notoriety on social media. According to local law enforcement, several people sent them the video, prompting them to start an investigation. Upon being identified by authorities, Reese was facing a Class A assault offense. Further investigation determined that the incident was a case of dating violence between the couple who'd been together for 2 years. Reese was later booked at the McLennan County Jail on April the 1st for a parole violation pertaining to an undisclosed prior offense. He was reportedly convicted in juvenile court, but no further updates have recently been made to the public regarding the case involving his girlfriend. Number 6. Emily Wilson. A Maine woman was arrested for domestic violence on April the 18th of 2016 and appeared to wear a Stop Domestic Violence t-shirt in her resulting booking photo. 38-year-old Emily Wilson and her husband got into an argument in the bedroom of their Sangerville residence. During the confrontation, which centered around an affair Wilson accused her husband of having, she grabbed the man by the wrist. She then brandished a loaded .45 caliber handgun and fired it at the mattress. After the gun was allegedly discharged several more times, her husband called the police. Investigators later recovered the firearm and shell casings from the home, which was seized as evidence. Wilson was then taken into custody on charges of domestic violence, reckless conduct with a dangerous weapon, and domestic violence assault. She posted a $200 cash bail and was subsequently due to appear at the Piscatquis County Judicial Center. Number 5. Eva E. Bond. On July the 12th of 2018, police in Sterlington, Louisiana responded to a disturbance at the Dollar General store on Highway 2, which was reported by local woman Eva E. Bond. The 33-year-old told responding officers that her boyfriend, Matthew Meredith, had struck her in the head with a frying pan. An arrest report indicated that Bond didn't know her boyfriend's name, phone number, or where they lived. Because she was unable to give a consistent account of the incident, the police believed that Bond was under the influence of intoxicants. Bond's mother later revealed that her daughter struggles with her mental health. When Meredith was questioned by police, he said that Bond had been drinking and taking medication throughout the day before she suddenly struck him in the face with her foot. He claimed that the woman then picked up a frying pan and attempted to hit him with it. Meredith added that while he was trying to restrain her, the frying pan inadvertently struck her in the head. The man wasn't charged, but Bond was taken to the Correctional Center for Domestic Aggravated Assault and Domestic Abuse Battery. She was placed in an isolation cell as a consequence of her erratic behavior. Number 4. Connie Jones. A Louisiana woman was arrested by Monroe police for beating up her boyfriend with a trophy on June the 17th of 2019. Early that day, 40-year-old Connie Jones arrived at her home where an argument between her and her live-in boyfriend ensued. During the course of the row, Jones reportedly became violent and started throwing household items at her partner, before pushing him to the floor. She then proceeded to strike the man's forehead with the trophy 4 times. According to the victim's testimony, he got back on his feet and took the trophy away from Jones, then called the police. When officers arrived at the home, Jones admitted that she threw items at her boyfriend, pushed him and punched him several times in the head. She added that she'd become angry because the man had entertained advances from a younger woman. Arrest reports indicated that Jones was taken into custody on domestic abuse, battery, and aggravated battery charges. She was booked at the Correctional Center in Richwood on a $40,000 bond. Number 3. Violence in Spain. In the Spanish municipality of San Juan de Alicante, a 22-year-old Ukrainian immigrant viciously attacked his girlfriend. A glimpse of the brutal onslaught was captured by CCTV cameras installed at a nearby apartment block. The footage, which was eventually released to the public by local authorities, showed the man running up to his girlfriend and throttling her as she walked into the foyer. The man subsequently knocked her to the ground and punched her repeatedly as she lay on the floor. He then pulled her up by the hair and dragged her face down up the steps towards their home. Security firm workers who were reviewing footage discovered what had transpired and immediately handed the video over to the police. Officers determined that the victim was a 38-year-old Hungarian woman and that no reports had been filed in connection with the incident. They eventually tracked the man down and took him into custody. After the arrest, the woman reportedly filed a formal complaint. Subsequent information indicated that the suspect appeared before a judge in a closed court hearing. Number 2. Danry Vasquez. In August of 2016, a Venezuelan minor league baseball player was caught on video beating his girlfriend in the stairwell of a Texas stadium. 22-year-old Danry Vasquez, who was playing for the Corpus Christi Hawks at Whataburger Field, struck the woman and dragged her down the stairs by the hair. In the wake of the incident, Vasquez was arrested for domestic violence and was cut from the team. The victim, only identified as Fabiana, reportedly begged prosecutors not to go through with the case against Vasquez, whom she wholly supported. She agreed with the pre-trial diversion program subsequently given to the man. As part of the agreement, Vasquez was ordered to undergo a 52-session batterer's intervention course, a 16-hour anger management session, and meet with a psychologist. In addition, he was banned from using drugs or drinking alcohol for the duration of the program. After he completed all the requirements, the case was dismissed in March of 2018. That year, Vasquez signed with the Lancaster Barnstormers of the Atlantic League of Professional Baseball. After the team found out about the disturbing video, though, they decided to cut ties with him. We have more cases lined up for you from last year's video on the topic. Stay tuned if you'd like to watch some more. Number 1. Christopher Jasewski. 25-year-old Australian man Christopher Jasewski brutally attacked his girlfriend and then kidnapped her because he thought she was spending too much time with her friends. The incident unfolded on February the 23rd of 2017 in Melbourne, inside a Derrimut service station. Jasewski told Rita Leopoulos, aged 24, that she wasn't spending enough time with him and that she was always with her friends. As the situation started to devolve into violence, Leopoulos attempted to flee. Jasewski swiftly chased her down and knocked her to the ground. He proceeded to smash her phone and shove her head into a glass door. As the woman struggled to get away, Jasewski punched her and dragged her by the hair, dragging her through the doors and into his car. He then took her to a secluded caravan in Gordon, allegedly telling Leopoulos to write goodbye letters to her family in preparation for her impending death. Fortunately, she survived the ordeal, but was left with a fractured nose, grazing, swelling, and bite wounds. When Jasewski was arrested at his property, authorities found the victim and took her to a hospital where she was treated for her injuries. A gun, ammunition, and cannabis were also found at the home. In March of 2018, Jasewski pleaded guilty to several charges, including intentionally causing serious injury, common assault, kidnapping, and death threats. He was fined to the tune of at least $2,300 and was sentenced to 4 years behind bars with a non-parole period of 2.5 years. Thanks for watching. If you could send one living person that you personally know to hell. Who would you pick and why? Let us know in the comment section below.